I mean, this is one of the most shocking moments from Davos, and hilarious. I mean, you gotta just kind of laugh at these freaks. This isn't just anybody though. It's the NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg, who was a prime minister of Norway as a social democrat, I believe, and this isn't someone coming from the far right.
It is extremely important that President Putin doesn't win this war, partly because it will be a tragedy for the Ukrainians, but it will be very dangerous for all of us, because then the message to authoritarian leaders, not only to Putin, but also other authoritarian leaders, is that when they use brutal force, when they violate international law, they achieve what they want. And that will be a very bad and dangerous lesson. It will make the world more dangerous and us more vulnerable. And that's the reason why, if we want a negotiated peaceful solution to the war in Ukraine, we need to provide military support to Ukraine. That's the only way. Weapons, they are the way to peace.
Okay, wait, we got to hear that again.
Rewind.
Weapons, they are the way to peace.
And then you can see that NATO promoted that video. An official NATO logo, which is a converted swastika, comes on screen. So NATO is proud of what Stoltenberg is saying there. This is a message that they want to send. Weapons are the way to peace, which obviously is, I hate to use this term, but it is Orwellian. War is peace. Weapons bring peace.
Yeah.
But what your thoughts?
I mean, yeah, look, could be a great new anthem. Like maybe you two could take the lead on this and put out a new anthem for Ukraine proxy war called "Weapons Are the Way to Peace." Yeah, no, look, but this is, I mean, see, what is even his job, Jens Stoltenberg, as the NATO Secretary-General? He doesn't actually have a military role because NATO has a military council, so they handle that. So what is he actually, like, what's his job? It's basically to be a spokesperson for whatever the U.S. government wants him to say and to sell weapons and to hawk to taxpayers in NATO countries the need for them to spend their money on weapons. Like, that's basically what his job is. And so accordingly, he has to come up with creative ways to sell it. So I guess this is what he came up with. Weapons are the way to peace, because he recognizes that people don't want a war. They want peace. And so his way to sell them on more weapons is to say that this will help bring them peace. But look, I mean, everyone forgets this is not some case. Like, you don't have to support Russia's invasion to recognize that there's a long background to this, that Russia was provoked, that all the warnings from top U.S. officials like George Kennan, William Burns, that a NATO membership, NATO expansion was a red line for Russia, the coup in Ukraine, I mean, all the things we've talked about. But also there's a background, and the background includes that Russia put out detailed proposals to NATO and to the U.S. about a year ago, just over a year ago, in December 2021. These long draft treaties laying out all of Russia's concerns about NATO expansion, about the positioning of NATO weaponry on Russia's borders, right? For example, because Russia doesn't have Russian weaponry in Canada or Mexico, but the U.S. has heavy offensive weaponry surrounding Russia, and Russia wanted to address all that. Russia also wanted to finally see the implementation of the Minsk Accords, which is the agreed-upon peace deal for ending the civil war that began in Ukraine after the 2014 coup, and that Ukraine refused to implement because the Ukraine government was basically taking the side of its far-right nationalists who didn't want any kind of accommodation that recognized the rights of ethnic Russians instead of Ukraine. So Russia put out proposals to address all of this. And what was the U.S. response? They wouldn't even discuss the core issues. The core issue for Russia, for example, was NATO expansion and the placement of and the rollback of NATO weaponry in NATO states. Russia proposed to NATO and the U.S., like, you can keep your troop deployments, you can keep your offensive weapons, but except in the states that you've expanded to after 1997, we want to see your weapons rolled back there. So keep your weapons in all these states that you have, including ones that are pointed at us, but in the states where you've placed weapons after 1997, where you brought in like a whole new wave of states, including the Baltic states, those have to be rolled back because those are too close to us. And based on that, the U.S. refused to even discuss it. So the idea now that the only way to peace is through more war is just a lie, because there's already been out there proposals on the table to address this, which could easily be revived. But the official position is it's hegemony over peace. And any any agreement that constrains the U.S.-led NATO system is deemed to be off limits, and so they just don't even want to discuss it. And who has to pay the price? It's Ukrainians, who will continue to be sacrificed under the mantra of weapons are the way to peace.
And the next NATO Secretary General, the one being put forward by the U.S., is the Canadian Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, who I don't want to call her a Nazi, but she definitely is pretty enthusiastic about Nazis in Ukraine.
Her grandfather was a Nazi. I mean,
her grandfather, Michael Chomiak, indirectly worked for Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
His publication, which was based in Ukraine and in Poland, was funded through Hitler's information ministry. He worked under Joseph Goebbels. He lived in the seized property of a Jew in Poland. He supported the Nazi Germany, and she lied about it. And then 2 Russian diplomats in Canada who brought this up before the media were deported for telling the truth about her. And not only that, she worked for the Encyclopedia of Ukraine, which her grandfather, Michael Chomiak, started. And if you look in the Encyclopedia of Ukraine, the way they talk about Stepan Bandera is pretty positive. The leader of the Nazi collaborator OUNB forces. She also wrote for a Ukrainian diaspora publication. She was put up for this job when she was starting her journalistic career in Canada, which ran ads for neo-Nazi summer camps for youth, Bandera Summer Camp, which these ads in the classified section of the paper that would have Chrystia Freeland articles would actually have Galicia SS logos and iron crosses. I mean, it's pretty sick stuff. And when the war erupted in February, she went out to a rally in Ottawa and held up an OUNB red and black flag, the flag of the Nazi collaborator partisan army in Ukraine. So this is the person that the U.S. is putting up, at least right now, has announced as its possible preference for NATO Secretary General. It really speaks to what NATO is and always has been. But, you know, moving along, I mean, there's just endless comments at Davos, we're standing with Ukraine until this war is won by General James Cleverly. But here's a more, I think, consequential figure, and it's the leader of Poland, Andrzej Duda, the president. And, you know, he's right there on the border with Ukraine. I always, find it peculiar how they balance the historical reality that Bandera, the hero of the post-Maidan regime, has slaughtered so many ethnic Poles, and he's being honored officially by the Ukrainian parliament, and Poland's support for this war. And I guess it's just the shared hatred of Russia.
And I know very well that Ukraine needs weapon, as I said yesterday, and once again, weapon. Weapons are crucial now because this war is really very difficult. This is not the end of the war. Russia is not defeating. They are still Russians. They are still very strong.
They're still Russians.
A lot of Russian soldiers in the front line, and we are afraid that they are preparing. Now they are preparing themselves for the new offensive in a few months, probably.
Well, that's true.
So this is crucial to send now additional military support to Ukraine, especially modern tanks, especially modern missiles to defend Ukraine, but first of all, to stop Russian offensive.
Okay, Aaron, Germany is being asked to send Leopard tanks to Ukraine. These are very good tanks. Germany's closer than the U.S. And Germany has said, well, we'll send them if you send the M1A1 Abrams tanks. And the U.S. is saying, well, these tanks are too heavy and the engine is difficult to repair. The Ukrainians aren't trained in them. It's
interesting. And, look, it's possible that the U.S. is being sincere here when they say that the Abrams tank, it's too clunky, it wouldn't work for Ukraine, it requires too much maintenance. It's also possible they're worried that it would be embarrassing for them to send it and have it perform badly, which has happened to the U.S. before. Like in Syria, for example, I think some of its weaponry sent to the rebels didn't perform so well. That's possible. Another possibility, though, and this was raised by recently by a German parliamentarian who is really principled, one of the few, and her name is Savim Dagdalin, and she wrote an article basically saying that a main motivator she thinks for this push for the U.S. for this pressure by the U.S. on Germany to send German tanks, combined with the U.S. refusal to send its own tanks, is that the U.S. wants to basically push Germany into the crossfire, so that if there's any Russian retaliation for this, for sending tanks off to battle Russian forces, that Germany faces it militarily and also politically, because Germany has always been. It's always had ties to Russia. Angela Merkel had a somewhat cooperative relationship with Putin. There was, of course, the Nord Stream 2, which the U.S. successfully sabotaged. But Germany is still the key to an off-ramp. And there's always been an effort to rupture relations between Germany and Russia, because if there's no ties between Germany and Russia, then U.S. dominance is secure. So what she's saying is that, this could be an effort by the U.S. to get Germany into the crossfire militarily and politically, to ensure that German-Russian relations are permanently damaged, which would be the case if Germany is sending off tanks to fight Russian forces. And it's just funny to see this play out. And Germany has always been hesitant about this war. Before the war, it tried to engage in some diplomacy to avoid it. Schultz said to Zelensky, there's that, this report in the Wall Street Journal that, Schultz begged to Zelensky, like, how about we'll give you security guarantees as long as you pledge neutrality, not to join NATO. And Zelensky rejected it. This was days before Russia invaded. And so Germany's made an effort, and they didn't want to commit to killing the Nord Stream 2, but finally the Biden administration forced them to shut it down. And then to make sure that it permanently was shut down, somebody blew it up. We all know who it is. It had to have been the U.S. and its allies. And now Germany's facing this new round of pressure. And if history is a guide, I do think they'll cave. But it's interesting to me that they haven't so far. And I think that the aspect of why would the U.S. be so insistent that German tanks go to Ukraine, but not the U.S.'s own tanks? You mean to tell me that U.S. has no tanks that are suitable for Ukraine? So on the one hand, the U.S. is claiming that, they're fighting the new incarnation of Hitler. They're fighting to save civilization and save democracy from this tyrant. We have to do everything we can. But yet they're also saying, oh, we can't send you our own tanks. So something's going on there. Maybe they don't want to get embarrassed. Maybe they don't want to get embarrassed because the Abrams tank is a bad tank. I don't know. Or they just really want to sacrifice Germany and make sure that Germany and Russia never have any hope of having ties again.
Well, I think that's it. And we have Carlos del Toro, the U.S. Navy Secretary, stating that if the proxy war continues for 6 months more, it may become, in his words, challenging to maintain supplies to the U.S. military. In other words, the Ukraine proxy war is hurting the U.S. military, though it might be very good for orders from U.S. arms manufacturers and the MIC. And then at the same conference that Del Toro spoke at, Admiral Daryl Caudle, who's the commander of the U.S. Fleet Forces, also from the U.S. Fleet Forces Command, also from the U.S. Navy, said that the Navy might get to the point where it has to make the decision whether it needs to arm itself or arm Ukraine. So that's one issue there, is that the U.S. cannot continue to supply Ukraine at the level it needs. And now we need to tie that in to another development. And this is, something that is obviously being managed through hardline elements around the Pentagon through their media stenographers. So it's unclear how serious an initiative this is, but it's an initiative to attack Crimea. And there is a plan to consider attacks via the Ukrainian proxy on the Russian Federation, as I consider it. Crimea is the Russian Federation because a majority of people in Crimea wanted to be part of Russia instead of to be part of this post-Maidan regime that hates ethnic Russians and hates the Russian language and is outlawing the Orthodox Church, the Moscow Patriarchate of the Orthodox Church, which is the Orthodox Church. And so from Russia's point of view, it's seen as an attack on Russia. So if the U.S. were to do what's being put forward in this plan, which Aaron isn't sending M1A1 tanks, but would be sending M1 Bradleys, which have powerful guns and are capable, would be used to try to break Russian lines heading towards Crimea, supplying Bradley fighting vehicles, supplying long-range missiles to attack Russian bases in Crimea. That would be the US attacking Russia. That would be something that we never experienced growing up as Gen Xers during the Cold War. In fact, nothing like that happened during the Cold War. And if you were to tell me this was something that would happen 5 years ago, I would have torn what's left of my hair out.
Yeah.
And this is crazy.
It's nuts. It's nuts.
So does the US even have the capacity to supply them for these attacks? Well, this is what Ukraine wants. Ukraine wants, at least this is what the figures in Kiev want to do. And why they want to do it, it will strengthen Kiev's position in any future negotiations. However, the US is willing to risk escalation. And the hardliners interviewed in this piece, including Philip Breedlove, who's a former US NATO representative, who previously called for US armed intervention in Ukraine. They're saying that there's no way that Russia will deploy a tactical nuclear weapon, and that's why they think it's possible to start attacking Crimea. So they're daring Russia to use a tactical nuclear weapon. That's what this is about. That's where we're at here.
It's nuts. And let's assume they're right, that Russia won't deploy a tactical nuclear weapon. Okay, that's the best case scenario. But you know what Russia will deploy? It will deploy more of its heavy weaponry to target Ukraine on top of what it already has. They're basically asking for a lot more Ukrainians to die, because that's what Russia will make happen if Crimea is attacked with US-made weapons. And we've already seen a iteration of that when after the Kerch Bridge was blown up with, not heavy weaponry, just a truck bomb. That's when Russia escalated its attack on civilian infrastructure inside of Ukraine massively.
The electrical grid.
Yeah, as was predicted. Before this happened, the New York Times back in September reported that U.S. officials are baffled that Russia has avoided civilian infrastructure, and that they feared the most dangerous moments were yet to come. I'm basically quoting the Times there, and they're saying this based on what U.S. officials are telling them. So U.S. officials knew that if Ukraine continued to fight rather than negotiate and escalated its operations, such as attacking Crimea, the Kerch Bridge, they knew it would invite a Russian retaliation. That's exactly what happened, and Ukrainians have suffered for it. And now they're saying they want to do even way more, because we're not talking about a truck bomb of a bridge, which ultimately didn't hurt Russia that much at all. We're talking about using heavy U.S. weapons to attack Crimea, which Russia considers now its own territory. And as you say, the majority of the population there agrees. And they've been trying, there's been a movement in Crimea, a sizable one, to break off from Ukraine ever since Ukraine was founded in 1991. So it's like the idea that you're now going to help Ukraine go after a territory where the majority of the population doesn't want to be a part of Ukraine and considers themselves to be a part of Russia. It's pure insanity. And the best case scenario is that Russia doesn't use nuclear weapons. It just kills many, many more Ukrainians when it fires back. A
tactical nuclear weapon could wipe out an entire Ukrainian division, as far as I know, and that would be the purpose of it. Yeah. And what would the response be? First of all, from the media, the neocon Beltway press corps would be pushing Biden in the Rose Garden to directly retaliate. I can guarantee that.
Oh, of course.
That's what they did for Trump when there were pictures of dead children in Syria. So what do you think they do if a tactical nuke wipes out a Ukrainian division?
We'd all be done with. That's what would happen. It would be over. So these people are constantly willing to flirt with that, and they want to take the risk, and they're basically counting on Putin not to be a madman. They're completely counting on him, whereas they're willing to take all the risks.
The U.S. has always counted on Russian restraint as it escalated.
Yep.
At the same time, it paints the Russian leader as Hitler.
Exactly. It's so incoherent.
He's Hitler. He's going to invade Poland and Russia, and he's going to go into France. He's going to fight a two-front war, just like he's Hitler, but he's restrained, and we think he's rational, and we can attack his territory. and we're willing to do that. And really what this shows is desperation, because they know that Ukraine cannot hold on the way the war is shaping up right now after Bakhmut, because it will be kind of a war of attrition.
Yep.
They call it a World War I style trench war, whatever you want to call it. Ukraine does not have the manpower or the materiel that Russia has, and therefore they're going to try some desperate escalation to force Russia to the table. And it's not going to happen. It's not going to work. Even if they do it, it will not force the negotiation that they want. They're delusional. These are just the most dangerous people on the planet.